Some things you just can't shake. A shadow that follows you your whole life. For Elvis Presley, that shadow had a name. And Jesse Garon, his identical twin brother, born and gone on the same cold morning in Tupelo, Mississippi. Elvis came into the world 35 minutes later, alone. Was he? He became the most famous man on the planet. But he always felt like something was missing. A part of him. People said he talked to his brother his whole life. They said he felt Jesse's presence in quiet moments. He built a legacy big enough for two men. Was he trying to live for both of them? The story of Elvis is the story of a survivor, but it's also the story of a ghost, a brother he never knew but never forgot. And that story is filled with questions. Questions that haunt us just as they seem to haunt him. Number 17 was Elvis living for two. You have to wonder about the pressure. Not just the pressure of fame. That came later. The pressure of being the one who made it. The one who got to breathe. On January 8th, 1935, in a tiny two-room house in Tupelo, Gladys Presley gave birth to two boys. The first, Jesse Garon, was stillborn. The Dr. William Robert Hunt worked to save Gladys. He worked to save the second baby. That baby was Elvis Aaron. From his very first breath, Elvis was a survivor. But he was also what some psychologists now call a twinless twin. A person who was meant to grow up with a mirror image, a partner, but never did. This isn't just a sad family story. It might be the key to understanding Elvis. His drive, his ambition, it was almost superhuman. Was he just a talented kid from Mississippi who got lucky? Or was he pushing himself with the force of two lives? Peter Garon, in his definitive biography, Last Train to Memphis, describes a young Elvis with an almost unsettling sense of purpose. He wasn't just singing songs. He was trying to create a whole new world. A world where a poor boy could become a king. Maybe he felt he owed it to the brother who never even got to be a boy. Think about his generosity. It was legendary. He gave away Cadillacs, houses, jewelry. He'd pay for a stranger's medical bills. It was more than just showing off his wealth. It felt compulsive. Some who study the psychology of twinless twins suggest this can be a symptom of survivor's guilt. A deep, often unconscious need to make up for being the one who lived. It's like trying to balance the scales of fate. He got the life, so he had to give back endlessly. He had to prove he was worthy of the chance Jesse never got. And his loneliness was profound. He was always surrounded by people, the Memphis Mafia, fans, women. But by all accounts, he was one of the loneliest men in the world. Priscilla Presley wrote in her book, Elvis and Me, about his quiet, isolated moments, his need for connection that was never quite satisfied. He was searching for something, a soulmate, a connection as deep as the one he was born to have. He was an identical twin. That's a bond that starts in the womb. It's a shared identity. To have that ripped away at the moment of birth leaves a wound that no amount of fame, money, or adoration could ever truly heal. He was living a life, but it was a life defined by an absence, like a life that always had a question mark hanging over it. The question of what could have been, the question of the other half he never knew. He didn't just carry his own dreams, he carried the ghost of his brothers. What if Jesse's survival would have meant a less ambitious, more content Elvis? Was the crushing weight of living for two the very thing that propelled him to greatness? Could his entire life be seen as a frantic, beautiful, and ultimately tragic attempt to justify his own existence? Number 16, did Gladys's grief shape the king? Gladys Presley lost a son and gained a son in the same hour. That kind of emotional whiplash changes a person forever. She wrapped all her fears, all her hopes, and all her fierce, protective love around her surviving boy, Elvis. The relationship between Elvis and his mother was incredibly close, intensely close. Some would say unnervingly close, and you can trace it all back to that day in 1935. She had a constant nagging fear that she could lose Elvis too, just like she lost Jesse. This wasn't just normal motherly concern, it was a love sharpened by grief. And Elaine Dundee, in her book Elvis and Gladys, details a relationship that was almost symbiotic. They had their own private language, their own pet names. Elvis never rebelled against her in the way most teenagers do. He deferred to her, sought her approval above all others. He was her, living jewel, the one who survived. She couldn't bear to let him out of her sight for long. She walked him to school well into his childhood. She worried constantly when he started touring. This intense bond gave Elvis a tremendous sense of security. But it also might have crippled him in some ways. He was raised to be the center of his mother's universe. He was her miracle. This could explain his need for constant adoration later in life. He was used to being the sole focus of an intense love. When he got on stage, he was recreating that feeling, but with thousands of people. But no crowd could ever replace the singular, all-encompassing love of the mother who saw him as a gift from God, a replacement for the son she'd buried. Gladys's grief also meant that Jesse was never forgotten. He was a constant presence in their small family. They spoke of him. Elvis grew up knowing he was a twin. He grew up knowing he was the lucky one. This knowledge, passed down through his mother's sorrow, became a part of his identity. He wasn't just Elvis, he was the one who lived. This created a sense of specialness, but also a burden. He had to be good enough, successful enough, to make up for his mother's loss. When Gladys died in 1958, Elvis was devastated. He was 23 and serving in the army in Germany. His friends said he was never truly the same again. He sobbed uncontrollably at her funeral, crying out, "Everything I have is gone." He had lost his anchor, the one person whose love was absolute, the person whose entire world revolved around him because he was the child who had survived her greatest trauma. Her grief had shaped him, molded him, and in her death he was cast adrift. The boy who was defined by his mother's protective love was now completely on his own. And the ghost of Jesse, which had been filtered through Gladys's memory, was now his alone to carry. Did Gladys's fear of loss make Elvis afraid to ever be truly alone? Did her overwhelming love prevent him from forming healthy adult relationships later in life? Was his lifelong quest for spiritual answers a search for the mother he had lost, and through her the brother he had never known? Number 15. Why the name Jesse Garon? Names are not random, they carry weight, they carry history. Vernon and Gladys Presley were not wealthy or educated people, but they chose their sons' names with care. Elvis, Aaron, and Jesse Garon. The middle names, Aaron and Garon, are near anagrams. It's a poetic, almost biblical-sounding link between the two boys. But where did Jesse Garon come from? The name Jesse has deep roots. It's a powerful biblical name. Jesse was the father of King David. It suggests a lineage of greatness. It's a strong, traditional Southern name. But Garon is much more mysterious. It's not a common name. It's not a family name that researchers have been able to trace. This has led to a lot of speculation. Was it just a name they liked the sound of? Or did it have a deeper meaning? Some theories suggest Garon was a name that simply sounded good with Jesse, a kind of lyrical choice. But for a family so steeped in the church and biblical tradition, a random choice seems unlikely. One prevailing idea connects it to Vernon's father, Jesse D. McClowell Presley. The spellings are different, but the sound is close. Perhaps it was an honorific, a nod to Elvis's grandfather. But then why not use the exact name? The mystery of the name adds to the myth of the lost twin. Elvis Aaron became a name known around the globe. Jesse Garon became a whisper, a question mark. And Elvis himself was deeply connected to his own name, especially his middle name, Aaron. He believed it had a spiritual significance. He was aware of the biblical Aaron, the brother of Moses. It's another story of two brothers, one in the spotlight, one supporting him. Did Elvis see a parallel? The gravestone for Jesse in Tupelo originally had his name misspelled as Jesse. It was a simple, unmarked grave for years. Later, when Elvis became famous, a proper headstone was placed. The family was careful about the names. It mattered to them. The choice of Jesse Garon was deliberate. It was the name of a person, not just a sad event, a person who was loved and mourned. The name became a symbol of everything that was lost. It represents a life unlived, a song unsung. When Elvis talked about his brother, he used his name. It wasn't an abstract loss, it was the loss of Jesse. The name itself is a piece of the puzzle. It's a clue to the mindset of Vernon and Gladys. They saw their sons as a pair, a matched set, Elvis and Jesse, Aaron and Garon. The rhyming, mirrored nature of the middle names just reinforces the idea of two halves of a whole. One name became iconic, the other became a secret, known only to those who look deeper into the story of the king. Was the name Garon a mistake, a misremembered family name, or a complete invention? Could the similar sounding middle names have been a way for Gladys and Vernon to tie the boys together forever, even in death? Does the mystery of the name itself contribute to the enduring power of Jesse's story? Number 14, where is Jesse actually buried? This question sounds simple, but the answer is complicated and touches on poverty, memory, and the chaos that surrounds death. Jesse Garon Presley was buried the day after his birth. The Presley family had no money. They lived in a house built by Vernon and his father. They couldn't afford a proper funeral. They couldn't afford a real coffin. Vernon's father, Jesse, helped build a small wooden box. Jesse Garon was buried in that box in Priceville Cemetery, the local cemetery in Tupelo, Mississippi. But here's where the mystery begins. He was buried in an unmarked grave. There was no headstone. There might not have been any kind of marker at all. It was just a spot in the ground that the family knew. For decades, as Elvis became a global superstar, his twin brother lay in an anonymous plot. People in Tupelo knew the story, of course. But the exact location was a matter of memory, not record. In 1977, after Elvis died, interest in every aspect of his life exploded. The story of Jesse became more widely known. A headstone was eventually placed in Priceville Cemetery. It's a memorial. It reads, Jesse Garon Presley, son of Gladys and Vernon Presley, January 8th, 1935. It's a place for fans to go. A place to acknowledge the brother who was lost. But is he really there? Over the years, doubts have been raised. Memories fade. And landscapes change. Could the family, years later, have misidentified the exact spot? Without a marker from 1935, it's almost impossible to be 100% certain. The headstone that stands today is a tribute, a best guess based on family memory. It gives a physical location to a spiritual loss. Then there's Graceland. In the meditation garden at Graceland, there is another memorial plaque for Jesse. It sits near the graves of Elvis, his mother Gladys, his father Vernon, and his grandmother Minnie Mae. The plaque reads, in memory of his twin brother Jesse Garon, 1935. This is the place most fans associate with Jesse. It's a part of the official Elvis story enshrined at his home, but his body is not there. In Tennessee law, at the time, prevented moving a body from one state to another for reburial in a private residence. So Jesse remains in Mississippi. This separation is symbolic. Elvis is surrounded by his family in death at his beloved home. But his twin, the person he was physically closest to, is miles away, alone in a cemetery in the town where their story began. The uncertainty about the exact burial spot adds another layer of sorrow. It's as if Jesse's physical presence was as fleeting and uncertain as his life. He slipped into the world and out again, leaving almost no trace, just a small box in the Mississippi earth and a giant hole in his brother's heart. Could modern technology like ground-penetrating radar ever confirm the exact location of the small wooden coffin in Priceville Cemetery? Does the existence of two memorials, one in Tupelo and one at Graceland, reflect the dual nature of Jesse's identity, the real baby buried in poverty and the mythic brother of a king? If the exact spot is lost to time, does it make Jesse's story even more ghostly and symbolic? Number 13, what did the doctor know? The birth of the Presley twins was a difficult and traumatic event. It happened at home, not in a hospital. This was common for poor rural families in the 1930s. The doctor in attendance was Dr. William Robert Hunt. He was a respected local physician. He arrived to find Gladys in labor and in distress. He delivered Jesse first. The baby was stillborn. Dr. Hunt then had to focus on saving Gladys, who was hemorrhaging, and delivering the second twin, Elvis. The medical realities of 1935 were stark. Infant mortality was high. The chances of both twins surviving a complicated home birth were not great. Dr. Hunt did what he could with the resources available. He saved Elvis, he saved Gladys. In that context, his actions were heroic. But questions linger. What exactly happened to Jesse? Was he stillborn in the truest sense, having passed away in the womb before labor began? Or did he die during the birthing process? Medical records from that time for a home birth in rural Mississippi are likely non-existent or minimal at best. We only have the story passed down. The story is that Jesse was born dead. But what if there was a flicker of life? What if, for a few moments, he was alive? In the chaos of the delivery, with Gladys's life in danger, could a weak breath have been missed? This is pure speculation, of course. But it's a haunting thought. The line between a stillbirth and a neonatal death can be thin. The diagnosis was made by one doctor in a stressful situation in a poorly lit room. We also don't know the exact cause of death. Was it a problem with the umbilical cord? A developmental issue, twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome, a condition where one twin receives more blood flow than the other, was not understood then. Today, with modern medicine, could Jesse have been saved? Almost certainly. An ultrasound would have identified the twins and any potential problems. A hospital delivery would have provided immediate care. The tragedy of Jesse's death is also a story about time and place, a story of poverty and the limits of medicine. Dr. Hunt's role was pivotal. He was the first person to see both boys. He was the one who pronounced one dead and handed the other to his mother. He was the gatekeeper between life and death for the Presley twins. He continued to be the family's doctor for years. Did he ever talk about that night? Did he carry any of that weight with him? He was a professional, and he likely saw many tragedies. But he probably never forgot the night he delivered the boy who would become the king of rock and roll and the brother who never drew a breath. Did Dr. Hunt ever express any uncertainty or regret about the events of that night? Are there any hidden medical notes or personal diaries from Dr. Hunt that could shed more light on the specific complications of the birth? Could a modern medical analysis of the known facts offer a more precise theory on why Jesse died? And could it have been prevented even with the knowledge of 1935? Number 12, was Vernon's quiet grief just as powerful? So much of the story focuses on Gladys, her sorrow, her fear, her intense bond with Elvis. It's easy to overlook Vernon Presley. He was a quiet man, a man of few words. He was often in the background. But his grief was real. He lost a son too. And he had to be the strong one. He had to build the coffin. He had to arrange the burial. He had to support his grieving wife while dealing with his own pain. Vernon's life was hard. He struggled to find steady work. He even served time in prison at Parchman Farm for forging a check. This was a man who knew hardship. The loss of his firstborn son was another heavy blow. While Gladys's grief was emotional and visible, Vernon's was likely more stoic, more internalized. This was typical for men of his generation and background. You didn't talk about your feelings. You just kept going. But that quiet grief shaped his relationship with Elvis too. He was proud of his son, immensely proud. But there was always a distance that wasn't there with Gladys. As Elvis's manager, Colonel Tom Parker, took more control, Vernon was often pushed to the side in business matters. He managed Elvis's affairs at Graceland, but he wasn't the driving emotional force in his son's life. Gladys was. Think about the dynamic. Vernon saw the son who lived. He saw the daily reminder of the son who had died. For a man who had to physically bury his own child in a handmade box that had to leave a permanent scar. Some biographers like Elaine Dundee have suggested that Vernon's own difficult relationship with his father, Jesse, influenced his parenting. He was perhaps less emotionally available than Gladys. When Elvis bought Graceland, it became a home for the whole family. Vernon lived there until his death in 1979. He saw the rise and fall of his famous son. He outlived Elvis by 2 years. In the end, he was buried next to him alongside Gladys in the meditation garden. The family was reunited in death. But you have to wonder about the conversations he and Elvis had over the years. Did they ever talk father to son about Jesse? Did Vernon ever share the burden he carried from that day? The story of Jesse is often told through a female lens, the loss of a mother. But the father's story is there too. It's just quieter, a silent bass note of sorrow under the melody of Elvis's life. Did Vernon's stoicism create a void that Elvis spent his life trying to fill with the noise of fame and applause? How did seeing Elvis achieve unimaginable success affect a father who had once been unable to even afford a proper coffin for his other son? Did Vernon ever visit Jesse's grave alone, away from the family, to have a private moment with the son he barely knew? Number 11. Did Elvis talk to Jesse? This is one of the most persistent and powerful parts of the Elvis and Jesse legend. The idea that Elvis had conversations with his dead brother his entire life. It sounds strange, but for a twinless twin, it might not be. The connection is primal. Many people who lose a loved one talk to them. They visit their grave and share news. For Elvis, this connection was with someone he never knew but always felt. Several people close to Elvis confirmed this. His stepmother, D. Stanley Presley, claimed Elvis often spoke to Jesse. Larry Geller Elvis's spiritual advisor and hairdresser, wrote extensively about it in his book, If I Can Dream. Geller said that Elvis would have long, one-sided conversations with Jesse, especially late at night in his room at Graceland. He would talk about his fears, his hopes, the pressures of his life. In Jesse, he had the perfect confidant, one who would never judge, never betray him, and never try to use him for his fame. A silent, perfect brother. This wasn't just a casual, I miss you. It was a deep, ongoing dialogue. Elvis felt Jesse's presence. He believed his brother was a guardian spirit watching over him. This belief was tied into his broader spiritual quest. Elvis was deeply religious. He was raised in the Assembly of God Church, but later in life he explored all kinds of spiritual and mystical beliefs. He read books on numerology, the afterlife, and Eastern religions. He was searching for answers about life, death, and his own purpose. His connection to Jesse was a central part of that search. If Jesse's spirit was real and watching over him, then death was not the end. Imagine Elvis alone in his mansion, surrounded by every material thing he could want, but feeling utterly isolated. Talking to Jesse was a way to connect with the other half of himself, the pure, innocent part that was never corrupted by fame or money. Jesse represented home, family, and a life that could have been simpler. He was an anchor to his past and a link to the spiritual world he was so desperate to understand. These conversations were a coping mechanism, a way to process the insane reality of his life. He was talking to his brother, but he was also talking to himself. The part of himself that was still that little boy from Tupelo. The part of him that felt the loss, the guilt, and the loneliness. It was a way to keep the memory alive, not as a tragedy, but as a living relationship. The body was gone, but the bond remained. For Elvis, his twin brother was not in a grave in Mississippi. He was right there with him in the room listening. Were these conversations a sign of deep psychological distress or a healthy spiritual practice that brought him comfort? If he truly felt Jesse's presence, did he ever feel guided or warned by him during critical moments in his career? Did anyone else, like Priscilla or members of the Memphis Mafia, ever overhear these conversations, and what did they truly think? Number 10, was the Memphis Mafia a replacement brotherhood? And Elvis Presley never went anywhere alone. He was constantly surrounded by a group of friends, relatives, and employees that the press dubbed the Memphis Mafia. They lived with him, traveled with him, worked for him. They were his companions, his bodyguards, and his buffer against the outside world. On the surface, it was the ultimate entourage, but was it something deeper? Was Elvis trying to build the family he lost? Was he trying to replace one brother with a dozen? The core members of this group were men like Red West, Sonny West, and Lamar Fike. They were loyal, they were always there. They created a bubble around Elvis, protecting him from the demands of fame, but they also enabled his worst habits. They were on his payroll. This created a complicated dynamic. They were friends, but he was the boss. They could offer companionship, but not true equality. Think about the life of an identical twin. It's a life of constant companionship. A built-in best friend, a partner. Elvis never had that. From a young age, he was essentially an only child. The intense relationship with his mother filled some of that void, but as he grew up and entered the world, the emptiness was there. He craved brotherhood, he craved loyalty, so he created his own. The Memphis Mafia wasn't just a group of employees. It was a tribe. They had their own inside jokes, their own way of life. They functioned as a unit with Elvis at the center. In his 2007 book, Elvis, What Happened, written by Red and Sonny West with Dave Hebler, they describe a life of adventure, but also of isolation. They were all locked inside Elvis's world. This insular community was exactly what Elvis seemed to need. A shield, but a shield can also be a prison. It kept him safe, but it also kept him from growing, from facing the world on his own. The need for this surrogate brotherhood seems directly linked to the absence of Jesse. A twin relationship is the ultimate partnership. It's a team of two against the world. Elvis built a team, but it was a team he had to pay for. He was the sun, and they were the planets orbiting around him. It couldn't replicate the equal footing of a twin brother. A real brother could have told him no. A real brother could have challenged him, argued with him, and held him accountable in a way that employees never could. Jesse would have shared the past, the poverty, the dream. He would have been the one person who knew Elvis before he was Elvis. The Memphis Mafia only knew the king. They were brothers in arms, but they were not brothers in blood. Did Elvis consciously assemble the Memphis Mafia to fill the void left by Jesse, or was it an unconscious drive for companionship? If Jesse had lived, would there have been a Memphis Mafia at all, or would Jesse have been the only confidant Elvis truly needed? Did the unequal power dynamic within the group ultimately make Elvis even more lonely than if he had been by himself? Number 9. Did the alpha twin theory haunt him? There's a persistent, almost folkloric belief about identical twins, especially in cases where one does not survive. It's the idea of the alpha twin. The theory suggests that in the womb, one twin is stronger, more dominant. This twin gets more nutrients, develops more robustly, the other twin is weaker. In a difficult birth, it's the stronger twin who is more likely to survive. This is not a scientifically proven medical theory in this exact form, but the underlying concept of unequal development in the womb, like with twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome, is very real. Did Elvis believe he was the weaker twin? Did he believe that Jesse was the stronger one, the alpha, who sacrificed himself so that he could live? This idea turns the concept of survivor's guilt on its head. It's not just, why did I live and he died? It becomes, I only lived because he died. This is a much heavier psychological burden. It implies a debt that can never be repaid. Larry Geller, in his writings about Elvis's spiritual beliefs, touches on this. He suggests that Elvis felt that Jesse was the more spiritual, more angelic one, that he was destined for a higher plane, and his time on earth was never meant to be. Elvis, in this view, was the one left behind to deal with the messy earthly world. This belief could have fueled his lifelong spiritual search. He was trying to connect with that purer, higher world where his brother resided. He was the earthly half of a spiritual whole. This idea might also explain some of his self-destructive behavior. If you believe you are the weaker, less deserving survivor, it can lead to a lack of self-worth. Despite all the external validation, all the screaming fans and gold records, a core belief of unworthiness can remain. The drug abuse, the unhealthy eating habits, the isolation, could these have been manifestations of a man who, on some deep level, didn't feel he deserved the life he was given? It's as if he was unconsciously trying to prove the theory right, to show that he was, in fact, the weaker one who wasn't meant to last. This concept of the alpha twin is powerful because it's untestable. It's a myth. But myths can be more powerful than facts, especially when they are used to explain the inexplicable. Why did one baby die and the other become the most famous person in the world? The alpha twin theory provides a kind of mystical answer. It gives the tragedy a sense of purpose, a cosmic narrative. Jesse was the sacrifice, Elvis was the vessel. His life wasn't entirely his own. It was a gift from the brother who was too good for this world. Is there any evidence beyond anecdotal stories that Elvis ever spoke specifically about the idea of a stronger or weaker twin? Could this belief have been planted in his mind by his mother as a way for her to cope with the loss? If he believed Jesse was the superior soul, did his earthly success feel like a betrayal of his brother's spiritual nature? Number 8, how did Jesse influence the music? You can't hear Jesse's voice on any record. He never stood on a stage, but his presence, his absence is all over Elvis's music. It's in the deep, soul-shaking sorrow of his ballads. It's in the spiritual ecstasy of his gospel hymns. The music of Elvis Presley is often about a profound duality, the sacred and the profane, the Saturday night sinner and the Sunday morning saint. This is the duality of a man living with a ghost. Consider his gospel music. For Elvis, this wasn't a career move. It was the most important music he ever made. It was his direct line to God. The 3 Grammy Awards he won during his lifetime were all for his gospel albums. And when he sang songs like How Great Thou Art or Peace in the Valley, he wasn't just performing. He was testifying, he was reaching for something beyond this world. He was reaching for a place where a lost brother might be. This music was about salvation, redemption, and reunion after death. It was the soundtrack of his hope. The hope that he would one day see Jesse again. Then there is the loneliness in his secular music. The songs like Are You Lonesome Tonight or Heartbreak Hotel are not just about romantic loss. They tap into a primal, existential loneliness. When he sings, I'm so lonely I could die, you believe him. This was a man who felt a fundamental sense of being alone, no matter how big the crowd. This feeling surely stemmed from being the solitary survivor of a pair. The song is a question asked to a lover, but it could just as easily be a question asked to the universe, to the brother who was supposed to be there. The music historian Peter Garon points out the raw, unvarnished emotion in Elvis's early recordings at Sun Records. There was a desperation, like a need to be heard. Was he singing for himself, or was he singing for both of them? Trying to make a sound big enough to fill the silence left by his brother. The explosive energy of his rock and roll performances, the almost frantic need to connect with the audience, can be seen as an attempt to outrun the shadow of grief. To create so much life, so much noise, that it drowns out the quiet memory of death. Even the structure of his music often involved a call and response, particularly with his background vocalists, the Jordanaires. It was a musical conversation, a dialogue. This is a pattern that echoes the back and forth that should exist between twins. In his music, Elvis could create the harmony that was missing in his life. He could build a world of sound where he wasn't alone. The music was his therapy, it was his prayer, it was his way of speaking to and for Jesse. Did Elvis ever consciously dedicate a song or a performance to Jesse, even if only in his own mind? When choosing songs, was he drawn to themes of loss, separation, and eventual reunion because of his experience as a twinless twin? Is the shift from the rebellious rock and roll of the 50s to the more spiritual and introspective music of his later years a reflection of his deepening conversation with his brother's memory? Number 7 was self-destruction, a form of atonement. Elvis Presley's death at 42 was a tragedy, but it wasn't a surprise to those who knew him. His final years were marked by a slow public decline, prescription drug abuse, binge eating, paranoia, and reclusion. He was a man systematically destroying himself. Why? Why would someone who had everything, money, fame, love, choose that path? The answer might lie not in what he had, but in what he had lost on the day he was born. Survivor's guilt is a powerful, destructive force. It's a deep-seated, often unconscious feeling that you don't deserve to be alive when someone else is not. For Elvis, this wasn't an abstract concept, it was the foundational fact of his existence. He lived, Jesse died. Every success, every luxury, every moment of joy could have been a reminder of what his brother never had. This can create an unbearable internal conflict, a need to punish oneself for the crime of being alive. The drug abuse is the most obvious example. As detailed in the book Elvis, What Happened, he was consuming a staggering cocktail of uppers, downers, and painkillers. He wasn't just taking them to perform or to sleep, he was taking them to escape, to numb the physical and emotional pain. Was he trying to numb the guilt? Was he trying to get closer to a state of non-being, to get closer to his brother? It's a form of slow-motion suicide, a way of atoning for the sin of survival. His relationship with food was also self-destructive. The legendary stories of his eating habits, the fried peanut butter and banana sandwiches, the mountains of junk food point to more than just a big appetite. It was compulsive. It was a way to fill a void, not just a physical hunger, but a spiritual one. He was trying to fill the emptiness inside him, the empty space where his twin should have been. This self-destructive pattern fits with what some psychologists like Dr. Peter C. Wybrow in his book A Mood Apart have described in people suffering from unresolved grief and depression. The behavior is a symptom of a deeper wound. For Elvis, that wound was 42 years old. It never healed. The fame and isolation only made it worse. He couldn't trust anyone. He was surrounded by people who needed something from him. The only person he could have trusted implicitly, the one person who would have shared his DNA and his history, was gone. So he turned inward and he turned on himself. He was the surviving twin, but in the end, he couldn't survive his own survival. Could Elvis's decline have been stopped if he had acknowledged and treated his survivor's guilt with professional help? Did he see his physical deterioration as a just punishment for having a life that Jesse was denied? Was his addiction, in a way, an attempt to find a state of oblivion that mirrored the eternal peace he imagined for his brother? Number 6, what is twinless twin syndrome? The term twinless twin might sound like a pop psychology buzzword, but it refers to a very real and specific form of grief. It's the experience of someone whose twin has died, either at birth, in childhood, or in adulthood. Psychologists and researchers who study this phenomenon, like Dr. Nancy L. Siegel, author of Twin Mythconceptions, have identified a unique set of challenges and emotional responses. Looking at Elvis Presley through the lens of this syndrome is like finding a key to a locked room. Suddenly, so many of his behaviors make a chilling kind of sense. One of the core aspects of the syndrome is a profound sense of loneliness and a feeling of not being whole. Twinless twins often describe feeling like a part of them is missing. This isn't just a metaphor. for identical twins who share 100% of their DNA. They are literally a biological duplicate of another person. Elvis expressed this feeling throughout his life. He often told people he felt like something was gone, that he was always searching for something he couldn't find. Another common trait is a complicated relationship with birthdays. A birthday is a celebration of life, but for a twinless twin, it is also the anniversary of a death. January 8th was the day Elvis was born, but it was also the day Jesse died. It was a day of joy and sorrow, forever linked. This could explain why Elvis often seemed subdued or reflective on his own birthday. It was a reminder of his solitary survival. Researchers also note that twinless twins can feel a strange sense of unreality, as if they are living in the wrong life. They can be haunted by the what if question. What if my twin had lived? Who would I be? This can lead to identity confusion. Elvis famously struggled with his own identity. Was he the polite, gospel-singing mama's boy? Or was he the rebellious, hip-shaking king of rock and roll? This inner conflict, this duality, is the very essence of twinship. He was living out the two sides of a coin that should have had another half. The syndrome can also manifest as survivor's guilt, a need to overachieve to live for two, and a lifelong search for a replacement for the lost twin. We see all of this in Elvis's story. His incredible drive, his compulsive generosity, his creation of the Memphis Mafia Brotherhood, his search for a soulmate. It all fits the pattern. He was the poster child for twinless twin syndrome long before the term was widely known. He was living proof of the enduring, invisible bond that not even death can break. If Elvis had been born in an era where twinless twin syndrome was a recognized condition, could therapy have helped him process his unique grief? How much of what we define as the Elvis personality, the charisma, the loneliness, the duality, is actually just a classic presentation of this syndrome? Does understanding this condition change our view of him from a flawed celebrity to a lifelong trauma survivor? Number 5. Did Elvis believe in a psychic connection? Elvis Presley's spiritual beliefs were complex and eclectic. He was not a man who was satisfied with simple answers. He was a searcher. And for a man who felt a lifelong connection to a brother in the spirit world, it's no surprise that he was drawn to the paranormal and the psychic. Did he believe he had a genuine psychic link to Jesse? The evidence suggests he did. This wasn't just a vague feeling. According to Larry Geller, Elvis believed he could communicate with Jesse. He felt his brother's presence as a protective force, a guardian angel. This belief goes beyond simple grief or memory. It enters the realm of the supernatural. Elvis read countless books on metaphysics, numerology, and life after death. He was fascinated by the idea that consciousness survives the body. For him, this wasn't an abstract philosophical concept. It was a personal reality. If consciousness survived, then Jesse was still somewhere. And if he was somewhere, Elvis could reach him. Think about the intense bond between identical twins. There are countless anecdotal stories of twins who seem to have a psychic connection. They feel each other's pain, they know what the other is thinking. This is often dismissed as a result of their shared genetics and environment. But what if the bond is deeper? For Elvis, who was born with that bond, but without the person, the connection would have felt like a phantom limb. He could feel something that wasn't physically there. He interpreted that feeling as a spiritual psychic link. This belief would have been a great source of comfort. The world of fame was treacherous and fake. But the connection with Jesse was pure. It was real. It was his secret strength. When he was on stage, facing thousands of screaming fans, he might have felt his brother's presence right there with him, giving him the power to perform. When he was alone and afraid, that connection was a source of peace. This psychic belief system also helps explain his fascination with his own mortality. He spoke about death often. He wasn't just afraid of it, he was curious about it. It was the gateway to the place where Jesse was. His death wouldn't be an end, but a reunion. This idea is central to many religions, but for Elvis, it was intensely personal. He wasn't just hoping to see his mother again in heaven, he was hoping to finally meet his other half. The person he had been psychically linked to his entire life. The brother he knew, but had never met. Did Elvis ever try to contact Jesse through a medium or a seance? Were his late-night conversations with his brother just him talking, or did he believe he was receiving replies? You know, if this psychic connection was so strong, did it ever provide him with warnings or premonitions that influenced his decisions? And number 4, how did the world find out about Jesse? For the first 2 decades of Elvis Presley's life, The story of his twin brother was a private family matter. It was a piece of Tupelo history, a personal tragedy, not a public fact. In the early days of his career, as he exploded onto the national scene in the mid-1950s, the official story was that he was an only child. The press releases, the interviews, the image created by his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, all omitted Jesse. Why was it kept a secret? There are a few reasons. First, it was deeply personal. The grief was still real for Gladys and Vernon. It wasn't something they wanted to share with the world. Second, it was a sad story. The image of Elvis was all about youth, energy, and rebellion. A story about a stillborn twin didn't fit the rock and roll narrative. The Colonel was a master of marketing. He was selling a fantasy, and the grim reality of infant mortality in poor rural Mississippi was not part of that fantasy. The story began to emerge more publicly as Elvis's fame became more established, and biographers started digging deeper into his past. Magazines and newspapers in the late 1950s and early 1960s started to mention it. But it was often treated as a minor biographical detail, a footnote. It wasn't until later in his life, and especially after his death, that the full weight and significance of Jesse's story began to be understood. The 1981 biography Elvis by Albert Goldman was one of the first major works to explore the psychological impact of Jesse's death on Elvis in a deep and often controversial way. Goldman portrayed it as a source of lifelong trauma that shaped Elvis's entire personality. After that, the story became an essential part of the Elvis legend. It was no longer a footnote, it was a central chapter. It offered an explanation for his loneliness, his spirituality, his self-destruction. It made him a more tragic, more human figure. The revelation of Jesse's existence changed how we see Elvis. He was no longer just the lucky boy who became a king, he was a survivor of a primal trauma. He was a man who was haunted. This knowledge adds a layer of pathos to every song, every performance. When we watch him singing Are You Lonesome Tonight, knowing he was a twinless twin, the song takes on a whole new meaning. The secret of Jesse Garon, once kept to protect the family's privacy and the star's image, ultimately became the key to understanding the heart of the man. Was Colonel Tom Parker instrumental in actively suppressing the story of Jesse in the early years? When Elvis himself was asked about it by reporters, how did he respond? How did the fan community react when the story of his lost twin became widely known? And did it change their relationship with his music and his memory? Number 3, could the story be a metaphor? We know Jesse Garon Presley was a real person. He was born, he died, he was buried. There is a birth certificate, a death certificate. These are facts. But over the years, the story of Jesse has grown beyond the facts. It has become a powerful myth, a metaphor, a way to explain the unexplainable genius and tragedy of Elvis Presley. Is it possible that the story of the lost twin is so powerful, not just because it's true, but because it represents the central conflict of Elvis's life? Jesse represents innocence. He is the boy from Tupelo who never left. He never saw the fame, the money, the drugs, the corruption. He remains forever pure. In this sense, Jesse is the part of Elvis that was lost when he became Elvis Presley, the global superstar. He is the simple country boy who was sacrificed for the creation of the king. Elvis spent his life trying to get back to that state of innocence, his love for gospel music, his desire for a simple family life, his moments of quiet reflection at Graceland. These were all attempts to connect with the Jesse inside himself. The story is also a classic two brothers archetype, seen in stories from Cain and Abel to the present day. The good son and the worldly son, the spiritual one and the earthly one. Jesse is the spiritual brother, the one who went straight to heaven. Elvis is the earthly one left to struggle with temptation and fame. His entire life becomes a battle between his Jesse side and his Elvis side. The man who loved his mother and loved God versus the man who was the symbol of sexual rebellion and excess. He was a walking civil war. The myth of the twin brother gives a name and a face to this internal conflict. This metaphorical reading doesn't diminish the reality of the loss, it deepens it. The real death of his brother became the perfect symbol for the spiritual struggles he would face his entire life. He felt literally split in two because he was split in two from birth. The physical separation was the start of a lifelong psychological and spiritual separation within himself. He was never a whole person because his other half was missing. When we talk about Jesse, are we just talking about a stillborn baby? Or are we also talking about Elvis's lost potential for a normal life? His lost privacy? his lost connection to his roots. Jesse Garon Presley is both a real boy buried in Mississippi and a powerful idea. He is the ghost in the machine of Elvis's fame, the silent partner in the biggest show on earth. The what if that will haunt the legend of the king forever. If Jesse had never existed, would we have had to invent him as a metaphor to explain the contradictions of Elvis? Does the power of Jesse's story tell us more about our own need for tragic, romantic narratives than it does about the historical facts? Could the entire Elvis Presley story be read as a modern myth about the price of fame, with Jesse as the symbol of the innocence that must be sacrificed? Number 2, what if he had lived? This is the ultimate question, the great unknown. It's impossible to answer, but it's essential to ask. What if Dr. Hunt had been able to save both babies on that January morning in 1935? How would the world be different if there had been 2 Presley boys? First, think about the poverty. The Presley family was already struggling to support 1 child. 2 would have been an immense financial burden. Would Vernon and Gladys have been able to cope? The intense focus that was lavished on Elvis would have been divided. He wouldn't have been the miracle child, the sole survivor. He would have just been one of 2 boys. This would have fundamentally changed his psychology. He might have been more grounded, less needy for external validation. The crushing pressure to succeed for his mother, to make up for her loss, would have been absent. Would there have been an Elvis Presley, the solo star, or would there have been a Presley brothers? Identical twins often have a powerful creative synergy. Think of the Everly brothers, though not identical, whose harmonies were legendary. Could Elvis and Jesse have been a rock and roll duo, one on guitar, both singing? Their shared DNA might have created a vocal blend unlike anything the world had ever heard. The history of popular music could have been completely different. What would Jesse have been like? Would he have been the quiet one, the steady one, while Elvis was the flamboyant performer? A brother could have been a grounding force. A brother, an equal, could have protected Elvis from the isolation of fame. He could have been the one person to say no to Colonel Tom Parker, the one person to tell Elvis he had a drug problem. A twin brother might have been the only person on earth who could have saved Elvis from himself. The life of Elvis Presley is a story of a man who desperately needed an equal, a partner, a true friend who wanted nothing from him. Jesse was supposed to be that person, but maybe Jesse's survival would have meant a quieter life for both of them. Maybe the drive to escape, to become someone, wouldn't have been as strong. Maybe they would have stayed in Memphis, become truck drivers or mechanics, and sung gospel music in church on Sundays. Maybe the world would have never heard of Elvis Presley. Perhaps the tragedy of Jesse's death was the terrible, necessary spark that lit the fire of Elvis's ambition. It's a haunting thought, that the price of the king's life was his brother's. We gained a cultural icon, but at what cost? The question of what might have been is the most enduring mystery of all. If both had lived, would their rivalry and competition have destroyed them, or would their bond have made them stronger? Could a world that was barely ready for one, Elvis Presley, have handled 2 of them? Is it possible that Jesse's true, unspoken role in history was to be the ghost that drove his brother to change the world? It's number 1, is he still with Elvis? In the end, this is the only question that truly matters. Not the historical details, not the psychological theories, but the spiritual reality. For Elvis, Jesse was never really gone. He was a presence, a voice, a spirit. And when Elvis died on August 16th, 1977, many of those who loved him believed it was not an end but a reunion. He is buried in the meditation garden at Graceland. It's a quiet, peaceful place. His grave is there, next to his mother and father, and just a few feet away is the memorial plaque for Jesse. In death, as in life, they are close, but separate. But are their spirits together? For a man like Elvis, who so deeply believed in an afterlife, who spent his life in conversation with his lost brother, death would have been seen as a homecoming. The end of a long, lonely journey. The story of Elvis and Jesse is not really a story about death. It's a story about an unbreakable bond, a bond that was forged in the womb and was not severed by a stillbirth. It endured through poverty and fame, through joy and despair. It was the defining relationship of Elvis's life, and it was with a person he never met in the flesh. It powered his art, it deepened his faith, and it may have fueled his destruction. It's a story that tells us that the people we lose are never truly gone. They live on in our memories, in our actions, and in the empty spaces they leave behind. The final mystery of Jesse Garon is not where he is buried or how he died. It's about the nature of love, loss, and identity. It forces us to ask what it means to be a person, to be a sibling, to be whole. Elvis Presley was the king of rock and roll. He was one of the most influential figures of the 20th century. But he was also just a boy from Tupelo who missed his brother, and maybe, just maybe, in some quiet garden of the universe, the Presley brothers are finally together, singing a song in perfect harmony. Does the enduring fascination with Jesse's story suggest a collective need to believe that death is not the end, and that the bonds of family are eternal? Could the entire story of Elvis's life be seen not as a tragedy of early death, but as the completion of a journey to reunite with his other half? If you visit Graceland today, in the silence of the meditation garden, whose presence do you feel more strongly the king the world knew, or the brother he knew in his heart?